Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing the best duo that you can use to get wins in the Master Premier Cup, and that is the pairing of Metagross and Garchomp. Not only do both of these Pokemon have insanely good stats, but they have absolutely unbelievably good movesets, and they form a perfect core pairing, as basically nothing breaks the Metagross Garchomp core with the exception of something like a Shadow Hydreigon. This is an unbalanced ABA-style team with Dragonite as the lead, Metagross as the safe switch, and Garchomp as the closer. And even though we do run into some core breakers and the game state is absolutely atrocious, this team was still able to get consistent 4-1s. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and we pick up a pretty decent lead in the first match, leading Dragonite into Shadow Hydreigon. Shadow Hydreigon, in my eyes, is basically the only core breaker to the Garchomp plus Metagross duo, so if I can neutralize this Pokemon on the lead, then my backline should basically just be free. This team really relies on the fact that Dragonite is very neutral in a lot of matchups, and Metagross as a safe switch is basically unanswerable unless your opponent has something like a Kingambit. My opponent sends in Metagross, I chip with the superpower, and now I switch my Metagross into theirs. Shadow Claws are adding up quite a bit, but they're not in Meteor Mash range quite yet, so I will put up the final shield as a full send the Earthquake. Now I can just farm up to the back-to-back Meteor Mashes, and if my opponent wants to keep this Metagross around, they're going to have to double shield. Meteor Mash is going to be no shielded. They're saving all Protect shields for their final Pokemon, which is going to be a Waterfall Shadow Gyarados. Even though my opponent has a 2-shield advantage, this game is already over. We have gotten the win. Meteor Mash gets the first shield. I can pivot into Dragonite, and the threat of Thunder Punch is going to force him to full send Twister. That's a lot of energy down the drain. I'm still one away from a second Meteor Mash on the Metagross, and now I can bring in Garchomp. Even though my opponent can hit me for super effective damage with a Shadow Twister, this is where Garchomp just having absolutely insanely bulky stats is just going to be game winning. Because even though my opponent can fire off the Shadow Twister, Garchomp will easily be able to hang on. Now I can just pivot into Metagross, make it to the Meteor Mash, and with the Twister already banked on the Garchomp, there's just no way out. My opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We move to game number 2, leading Dragonite into Tyranitar. Now, most of the time, I feel like I see the Shadow Tyranitar, but a non-Shadow Tyranitar is also a pretty cool pick. It's going to have a lot more survivability than the Shadow, and that is a little bit of a problem for me, because my Dragon Breaths are basically doing nothing here. I put up the shield, respected the Stone Edge, but unfortunately for me, they do not go for it. Instead, they're just going to settle for the back-to-back Brutal Swings. Now I'm just going to keep farming, watching for a catch. My opponent tries for the catch, sending in a Waterfall Gyarados, and the animations were absolutely crazy there. I don't know what happened when they switched into Gyarados. It felt like a bunch of waterfall animations just like flew at me back to back to back. Luckily, we're still able to fire off the Thunder Punch on good timing, but I didn't mean to overfarm as much as I did there. The only reason I did was because the animations were so crazy that I wasn't quite able to tell where they were at, and I didn't want to give them any free energy by letting a Waterfall sneak through. Back in comes Tyranitar. I'm able to make the Meteor Mash, pressuring away that final shield, and I still have a Charge Stack loaded on the Dragonite. I have a Garchomp in the back. At this point, this game should just be over. I can bring in the Garchomp. Tyranitar can't really damage me with a Brutal Swing. I'm very okay no-shielding, insta-clicking the Earth Power, and then I should be good. Even if they have something like a Primarina or a Florges, that's still not going to be able to get the win for them. So I fire off the Earth Power, Tyranitar gets KO'd, and my opponent is going to resign the match. We move to game number 3. We've got a Battle of Dragons, Dragonite into Shadow Garchomp. Now, Shadow Garchomp is an incredibly terrifying Pokemon to play against because Shadow Twister comes very close to one-shotting the Dragonite. I put up the shield, but honestly, I wasn't super confident that a Superpower would KO here, so I actually go down both Protect shields. Normally, going down 2 shields to 0 is a recipe for getting swept by your opponent's Garchomp, but I've already seen the Garchomp, and I'm going to neutralize it as they no-shield the Superpower. So even though I'm down 2 shields to 0, the Garchomp is gone, and that's very important. In comes Metagross, I bank a ton of energy, safe switch into my own Garchomp, and I'm going to be met with a Shadow Gyarados. If my opponent is running Twister, I could be in a lot of trouble here, but weirdly enough, the Shadow Gyarados that I saw today were all on Crunch. I think running Crunch on Gyarados is a mistake in this meta, because if you don't have Twister to hit for super effective damage into Garchomp, then Gyarados' matchup into Garchomp is actually very, very bad. Like, look at this. They are not going to be able to get the Dragon Breath down. So not only am I able to get a shield back, but they're forced to throw energy once again. Keep in mind, I still have so much energy stored on my Dragonite, and I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot. So I can send in the Dragonite, fire off the Thunder Punch. I already almost have another Superpower loaded. Thunder Punch is going to land, and my opponent is leaving it all up to their Metagross. Back in comes Metagross. Meteor Mash is available, but Dragonite is just simply not in knockout range. So I can tank the Meteor Mash, save the energy, and then pivot my Metagross into theirs. I'm not going to be able to make it to the Earthquake, but honestly, I don't need an Earthquake. Even a resistant Meteor Mash will do some pretty nice damage, and now I can threaten a Shadow Claw down. That's going to force energy. They're going to need to full send an Earthquake to take the knockout, and then I can just bring back in the Dragonite, and Dragonite has enough energy that I'm able to double up on superpowers. First one is going to be getting the shield. Second one, even at -1 attack, is going to be able to take the win. So that was definitely a pretty scary game, having to go down 2 shields to 0 against the Shadow Garchomp. But this backline, it's just too good, and we're still able to get the win. We move to the next match. What do you know? It's going to be Dragonite into Garchomp once again. People are very quickly figuring out that Garchomp is the premier Pokemon in this meta. Garchomp and Metagross are 1A and 1B. My opponent safe switches into Florges, and that is not an advisable decision when Metagross is around. I can send in Metagross, my opponent goes for a Trailblaze for some reason instead of a Chilling Water, and you know what? Before they can debuff me with a boosted Chilling Water, I may as well just full send the Meteor Mash, knock out the Florges, and neutralize their Fairy type. As they bring back in the Garchomp, they're always going to get outpaced here, and that's really helpful. Garchomp does have a pretty good matchup into Metagross, but if Metagross is up energy, landing a Meteor Mash does quite a lot of damage. My opponent even overfarms quite a bit, and I decide I'm just going to be full committing and investing resources into the Metagross. They full send Earth Power, I'm able to get the farm down. In the back is Mamoswine. Uh-oh. The Ice types have arrived. Ice is a very big weakness for this team. Both my lead and my closer are double weak to Ice. However, Ice types aren't the most common overall. A lot of the Mamoswines that I see are Mud Slap, so this one being Powder Snow is a little bit awkward. However, I can get both shields, go for the combo play with the superpower. This is super effective damage. Mamo barely able to hang on, and you know what? Let's let Dragonite take the KO here. The Dragon Breath did go through, so I can shield up the Icicle Spear. Dragon Breath takes the knockout, and we're able to get the win. We pick up a terrible lead in the next match, Dragonite into Shadow Mamoswine. I was going to stay in regardless, but as it turns out, this is actually a Mud Slap Shadow Mamoswine, so that is significantly better for Dragonite. I'll put up the shield as they go for the Icicle Spear. They're going to pivot out and safe switch into Metagross. I get to bank a ton of energy on Dragonite and then send it to Garchomp. Meteor Mash will hit for a massive amount of damage, but Garchomp will be able to hang on, and I'm going to look to overfarm and CMP tie Earth Power to the Meteor Mash. Earth Power, I believe, should do just enough damage to take the knockout here. They will put up the shield, and I decide that I'm very okay with just letting the Garchomp go. Garchomp has done its job. I was able to get a little bit of damage on the Metagross, and I was able to get the shield back, and now I can bring my Metagross into theirs. Ideally, if my opponent ever full sends an Earthquake, I believe I can get the farm down, but it'd be a very smart play for them to bait, and they do bait with a Meteor Mash. That's a very nice play from them. I'm going to farm up just shy of 100, and then full send the Meteor Mash. Well, I say full send the Meteor Mash. That's definitely the bait move, but either way, it's still going to be taking the knockout here. My opponent brings back in the Mamoswine, and I'm going to be firing off the Meteor Mash. I'm going to switch it to Dragonite, but just keep farming. My opponent reveals their final Pokemon in the back is Togekiss. They were trying to catch the superpower combo play, but up this much energy, I'm actually just going to be able to win this game. They should not be able to Mud Slap down the Metagross before Metagross gets a Meteor Mash either, so they're just going to be in a tremendous amount of trouble. Now I can make the third Thunder Punch on the Charge Attack priority tie here. That's going to be knocking out the Togekiss. Back in comes the Mamo, and if they don't throw right away, then I'm just going to get to outpace. They try and overfarm because they have to be able to outpace the Metagross, but in doing so, I just get the superpower. Mamoswine gets KO'd, and this team just keeps finding a way to beat Ice types. We see a familiar lead in the next match, Dragonite into Hydreigon, but this time it's the non-Shadow Hydreigon, which means, honestly, I don't really feel like respecting a Brutal Swing. Brutal Swing won't do a ton of damage here, but a Dragon Pulse one-hit KOs my Dragonite, and I just gotta respect it. GG's to them. I'm top left in that game. We get a pretty big shock in the next match as I lead Dragonite into a Dragon Tail Garchomp. Most Garchomp I've seen have been on Mudshot, because Mudshot does allow you to beat most of the fairy types. Dragon Tail, however, is going to make them significantly better against opposing dragons. I farm up, go for superpower, but I don't think it's quite going to take the knockout here, so I pivot out into the Metagross, and I'm able to sneak the Shadow Claw through as I catch the Twister. This way I get to save a ton of energy on Dragonite, and my opponent brings in a Pokemon that I was really not expecting to see, Ursaluna. Ursaluna has insanely good stats, but unfortunately it is stuck with Tackle. Tackle is one of the worst fast moves in the entire game. So, unfortunately, Ursaluna, if it ever got even a halfway competent fast move, would basically run this meta. It would be the best Pokemon, but since it's stuck on Tackle, unfortunately, its slow pacing kind of forever dooms it to not being the greatest option. I shield up the high horsepower, double up on Meteor Mashes, and once again, I'm down 2 shields, and my opponent has a Powder Snow Mamoswine in the back. This could get very, very tricky. I fire off Meteor Mash. That's going to be getting the shield. I was going to say I could rely on the Garchomp, but now I definitely can't because they have Mamoswine. I feel like my opponent will try and predict the combo play here, so I just stay in, but they don't predict the combo play. Instead, they're just going to stay in and farm up a massive amount of energy. The moment I get knocked out here, I'm going to look to bring in the Garchomp, but there's the weird delay where it shows the charge move for a second or two, so my opponent actually has time to react. Now the game comes down to a 50-50. They have a move, I have a move. Will they go for the catch? I say no. I click the superpower and they stay in and click Icicle Spear. They don't get the catch. Superpower KOs the Mamoswine. We get to farm down the Dragonite. That was a very scary endgame, down 2 shields to 0 to a Powder Snow Mamoswine, but luckily we were able to make it work. We move to the next match, picking up a pretty good lead, leading Dragonite into Primarina. Now, Primarinas this season run Waterfall, which means that they don't have any kind of meaningful damage into Dragonite outside of Disarming Voice. The good news is I just strictly outpaced Primarina. I overfarmed massively, and now I can just hit them with a barrage of Thunder Punches. There, I tried to do 2 Dragon Breaths in the move, and I believe this ended up kind of warping me into a CMP tie. That was not an intentional CMP tie. The fast moves were very, very janky this morning when I was trying to play. I ended up double shielding the Dragonite because if they're staying in, I feel like they probably don't have an amazing answer. And I'm just going to overfarm and fire off Thunder Punch right before they're disarming. If they shield, they're probably under tapping, so I can just go for the catch on Metagross, and that should basically just instantly win the game on the spot for me. Disarming Voice not going to do much to the Metagross, and my opponent gets to send in a Gyarados. This is a Waterfall Gyarados, and I should be in a very good position here. Now, I can fire off Meteor Mash. That's going to do very good damage. My opponent overfarms, letting me get the Meteor Mash, but I overtap. I guess I missed the bubble or something. I could have sworn I tapped it, but watching it back, I think I may have missed the bubble there, which is tragic, because if I get that Meteor Mash, then they're basically just in a range where I can just Dragon Breath them down, whereas now I'm forced to throw a Thunder Punch. Thunder Punch will secure the knockout there, and in the back, my opponent has a Pokemon that basically doesn't exist in this format, but unfortunately is going to win them the game here, and that is a Charmed Togekiss. If my opponent was running the typical moveset, which is Peck, I would be fine here. Or if I had actually clicked the Meteor Mash, which I'm willing to chalk up to user error, because looking back at it, I believe I hit right around the edge of the button, so it definitely could have just been user error. But if I didn't have to expend that first Thunder Punch and I was able to get that second Meteor Mash off, then even though they had the Togekiss in the back, the team would have just kept winning because we could have made 2 Thunder Punches into the Kiss and taken the win. But unfortunately, it was not to be. We are going to fall agonizingly short of being able to take home the win in this game. If I can maybe Dragon Breath down, there's a chance, but we actually end up simultaneously knocking each other out, and I end up taking the loss. We move to the next game, Dragonite into Metagross. This is a pretty neutral lead matchup. One of the reasons I did like the non-Shadow Dragonite was its ability to always tank a Meteor Mash. Like Meteor Mash lands, I can very comfortably survive it and build up to the back-to-back superpower. Ideally, I think the best play pattern here is to launch the first and then just save switch into Metagross and save the second, but here, I played a little bit differently and I fire off both moves. Now we actually end up getting a simultaneous switch Metagross into the Shadow Gyarados, and this is where having that move banked on the Dragonite would have actually worked out a lot better for me in the endgame. Because, obviously, Thunder Punch can threaten a one-hit KO onto the Shadow Gyarados. Now, this was one of the Shadow Gyarados that was actually on Crunch, which was a pretty big surprise. Now, the good news for me is that if they're on Crunch, then they're going to have a really bad matchup into the Garchomp, but I still feel like I'm at a disadvantage with the fact that I've misplayed the beginning of this game. I go for the Meteor Mash, they catch on a Metagross, but they did have a Meteor Mash stored here, so even though the energy does not land on the Gyarados, it still feels like my energy still went in a pretty good spot. My opponent reveals their final Pokemon in the back is going to be their own Garchomp, and this is where things could get very tricky. Meteor Mash is going to be no shielded. I get to bring in the Dragonite, and I'm firing off the triple resistant Thunder Punch. I do not want to lower my defense and attack. I need whatever damage I can get onto this Garchomp. Garchomp does get the Mud Shot down. Again, I absolutely hate how their charge moves just stay on the screen for a second or two there after the knockout. I bring in the Metagross, hoping to force energy, but they just send in the Shadow Gyarados. The one good thing I have going for me is the fact that the Gyarados is on the field and the Garchomp is not, and my opponent does not have access to Twister, so if I can just double up on Twisters without burning a shield, I can take home the win. My opponent goes for Aqua Tail into Twister, and it turns out that if they had gone triple Aqua Tail, they would have been able to force the shield and force a 50-50 here at the end, but unfortunately for them, they ended up going for the Crunch to try and fish for the debuff. That messed up their pacing, and they actually won the 50-50 at the end. So had they gone triple Aqua Tail, they could have gotten the win there. Definitely not my best played game, but luckily we're still able to get the win. Unfortunately, this next game is going to be a loss as we lead into Avalugg. For reasons unknown, I decide to bait with a Thunder Punch here, and my opponent ends up no-shielding it also for reasons unknown. So we are not playing well whatsoever. I save switch into Metagross, and my opponent is going to bank the Avalugg energy and then send in Tyranitar. If I have any chance of winning this game, I'm going to need to stall out this mid game, and that's going to involve double shielding the Metagross. Metagross is the only way that I can absorb energy from the Avalugg, so I'm going to need to double shield, get all shields down, and then look to try and re-pivot back into the Dragonite to bait back out the Avalugg. Now there, I have an Android Auto pop-up because my car was getting moved in the driveway, so everything that could go wrong is going wrong in this one. I pivot back into the Dragonite, they send an Avalugg, but they miscount. They miscount. I'm able to make the superpower. From the depths of despair, we're clawing our way back. Avalugg has been KO'd. And if my opponent tries to farm down with Tyranitar, I don't know if they're going to be able to do so. They're waiting down the timer. They're going to bring in a Shadow Force Palm Conkeldurr. Conkeldurr not going to get the farm down. I will make a superpower. And even though this is a debuff superpower, it still does huge damage on a Conkeldurr. Now I can bring in the Garchomp and utilize the fact that Garchomp has huge stats. Shadow Brutal Swing really not going to do a lot of damage here, but Shadow Dynamic Punch definitely will. They're going to farm up. There's the combo play. In comes Tyranitar, and Tyranitar has the Brutal Swing loaded. Brutal Swing is going to land, but Garchomp survives. I can pivot into the Metagross, make the Meteor Mash, and that is going to end the game. We have the moves stored on the Garchomp for later. My opponent can bring back in Conkeldurr, but there's just no way out. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. Man, watching back these games, I made so many misplays today. I feel like the game state was also very, very rough. The weird charge moves lingering for too long. There was quite a few games in which fast move animations and energy generation also were behaving very, very weirdly. But even despite all of the game weirdness, even despite my many misplays, this team was just an absolute juggernaut. If you don't want to be ABA weak to ice, you could lead Gyarados instead of Dragonite. I thought the Dragonite was an intriguing lead just because Dragonite does have play into both sides of the Metagross Garchomp core. As you saw, Dragonite actually doesn't do amazingly well into either one, but it also doesn't have catastrophically bad losses into either one. So I just wanted something that would try and be neutral into what I assumed to be the two most common Pokemon that I would encounter, because Metagross and Garchomp are just the two best Pokemon in this format. So if you're not wanting to risk it and be hard ABA weak to Fairy and hard ABA double weak to Ice, something like a Dragon Breath Twister Aquatail Gyarados could be a very good Dragonite replacement. You would still be soft into Fairy type leads, but if you encountered something like a Mamoswine, you would actually have a winning matchup instead of having a catastrophically bad one. But this team, it just kept spitting out 4-1s for me. It was very, very, very strong. I do owe a shout out to Mr. Sceptile Ice, as I had initially theory crafted the team with Gyarados, Metagross, and Garchomp, but after watching him absolutely destroying people with Dragonite, I figured, you know what, we'll just run an ABA team, we'll put Dragonite on the lead, and the rest kind of was history, as Dragonite did prove to be a very nice setup mon for these back two Pokemon. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and then an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much, and until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.